Women roles in society have changed considerably in the last 40 years. Gender roles and stereotypes have diminished as more women than men are now in college and acquire professional opportunities in fields that were previously off limits. As these educational and professional opportunities have increased, equal attitudes toward gender roles have also increased. In addition, more men are now raised in single parent or dual income households, which allows them to see women in a different light than men from previous generations. These cultural changes have led to a weakening in the traditional masculine versus feminine gender role perceptions that existed in the 50s and 60s. Unfortunately, leadership and gender roles in leadership have not kept up with these cultural changes. In this presentation, I intend to shed a light on the status of women in leadership, the barriers they face every day, and effective methods that may bridge the gender gap in leadership. Hello, Dr. Sanchez and classmates. My name is Marlene Sabeh, and my graduate project is titled The Gender Gap in Leadership, Causes and Solutions. I hope you will find it informative and beneficial. I sincerely look forward to your comments and feedback. This is the overview of the presentation. The social construct of women in leadership, masculine and feminine traits of leaders, barriers to women's leadership, two case studies, one from the field of medicine and the other from the field of telecommunications. Methods of bridging the gap, specifically Feedback 360, networking, and negotiating. A questionnaire to gather feedback from female leaders will follow, then a synthesis, an elaboration of limitations, future studies, and the conclusion. Before I illuminate the social construct of women's leaders, let's look at some facts. Women today hold 57% of all bachelor's degrees awarded, 60% of all master's degrees, more than half of the doctorate degrees, and make up nearly half of the American labor force. Yet, women remain dramatically underrepresented at senior levels. What are the causes of this gap? Shush et al. 2014 explained that the woman's role in leadership, just like her other roles, is a social construct. Shush et al. 2014 elaborated the structural perspective by elucidating that the society emphasizes a perceived match between gender roles and actual behavior. Those gender roles are shared beliefs about attributes of men and women. Society also has expectations that are normative, which means that the society describes qualities or behaviors that are desirable from each sex. Furthermore, the social construct has defined communal attributes for women revolving around being supportive, empathetic, and gentle. Business school professor Dr. Sean Andrews explained in this following short video the facts and issues of the gender gap in leadership.
So Sean, tell us a little bit about the gender leadership gap.
Sure. Well, women now comprise greater than 50% of the U.S. labor force, greater than 50% of all managerial and professional occupations, and greater than 60% of bachelor's degrees at U.S. universities. But despite these large numbers, less than 5% of women are leading Fortune 500 companies as CEOs, and that number has barely budged in the last 30 years.
Wow, that's amazing. Help us understand the significance.
Well, it's significant for a number of reasons, but if we're talking pocketbook, financially, companies that have a larger representation of women on their boards of directors financially outperform those with lower representation of women, as measured by return on equity, return on sales, and return on investment. We also know that companies that have greater diversity in their leadership have greater diversity in middle management. That leads to better employee engagement and a whole host of other factors.
Really important information, Sean.
And one last point. This is all important because stakeholders expect that the company is going to adequately manage and maximize their resources, including their human capital resources. So companies and corporations have a tremendous opportunity here to leverage the talent that's inherent in their employees, all of their employees, both men and women.
Great, thanks, Sean.
Monroe, Levine, Clark, Bickel, McDonald, and Rizar, 2015, explained a different set of socially constructed boundaries facing women in leadership. First, the glass ceiling is the phenomenon that suggests women find themselves within sight of top leadership positions but face invisible social barriers to reach them. Similarly, the glass cliff is another phenomenon that suggests women leaders are often set up for failure by being appointed positions with higher risks without having the support or guidance of mentors or advisors. A third metaphor, the sticky floor, represents how women are often held back due to cumulative disadvantages such as lack of resources and institutional support. Lastly, the labyrinth metaphor suggests that women in leadership must navigate intricate twists and turns more often than men in order to reach top positions. The mere belief of the existence of these barriers is by itself a social construct where women already know and expect they will have to face these issues on their way to higher positions. Men and women have different traits that are used in leadership. Moreover, there are sets of attributes that are perceived to be a male's or female's characteristic, often recognized in behaviors. We will explore the different perspectives from different disciplines covering feminine and masculine traits, stereotypes, perceptions, the think manager, think male perspective, as well as sex roles leadership. Jackson et al. 2014 explained the difference between masculine and feminine traits and their effect on leadership style. Women leaders are typically affectionate, so they are empathetic. They appreciate and promote teamwork. They support work-life balances. They are democratic in their decisions and flexible with their employees. Whereas males are often objective, dominant, autocratic in their decisions, and aggressive. Hence, a stereotypical masculine approach to leadership exemplifies a more rigid style that is productivity driven and focuses on end results, while a feminine approach is more nurturing, cooperative, and consistently democratic. Another perspective of feminine and masculine traits was conveyed by Kolb, 1999. She explained that the difference between the two behaviors exists only in the perception of these behaviors. Leadership continues to be perceived as a masculine role despite the success and proven ability by many women to be ready for the role. Due to these perceptions, women are less likely to be pre-selected as leaders. However, research has demonstrated that there are more similarities than differences in the leadership behaviors, and they are equally effective. Perceptions of leadership, though, allow harsh judgment of women leaders than men and less opportunities for women to be considered for promotions and advancement. And while stereotype perceptions of gender roles appear to have ramifications for perceptions of leadership, assessment of masculinity and femininity does not correlate to biological sex anymore. Therefore, women in high positions or female business graduates would score higher on masculine measures, especially with regards to self-confidence, which is considered a masculine trait. Coder and Spiller, 2013, researched gender stereotypes in leadership and found that the perception of women is being less qualified than men for high-level management. Furthermore, successful managers had characteristics, attitudes, and were typically used to describe men than women. Therefore, according to Coder and Spiller, 2013, women oftentimes wish to maintain their feminine self-image and often subsumed leadership to men. Coder and Spiller, 2013, also relate the BEM Sex Role Inventory, BSRI, that was basically created by several participants to determine feminine and masculine traits desirable in each category, which helped in understanding the sex role as a societal consequence and not a self-concept. Some of the BSRI masculine traits included aggression, ambition, assertiveness, competitiveness, independence, and self-reliance, while feminine traits included affection, compassion, gentleness, loyalty, sympathy, and tenderness. Barriers to women's leadership. We will cover organizational culture, gender stereotypes, failure to capitalize on women's talents, differences in national culture, women's relegation to human resource management positions, and differences in pay and political power between men and women. According to Hale, Emanuel, and Zathor, 2016, organizational culture is a barrier that contributes to keeping qualified women from reaching senior leadership and management positions. This is mainly due to the lack of cultural accommodation for their gender. In some organizations, the culture does not take sexual harassment as seriously as it should, causing women aspiring to leadership positions to be rather intimidated. Additionally, structural issues such as policies and work practices create gender imbalances in the workplace, and the corporate business world is not doing enough to bridge the gender inequality gap. Gender stereotypes and sexual tensions are the biggest barriers for many women on career paths to top leadership management positions. The issue of women playing second fiddle to men must begin to disappear because evidence suggests that women are just as qualified as men in being successful leaders. Failure to capitalize on the talents of women in the workforce is another challenge. In spite of the rise in women's education, women have not found it easy to access senior jobs in the private and public sector. The available statistics shown that increased education has not resulted in proportionate increase in women's presence in senior management positions. There is evidence that organizational norms and cultural practices are big barriers to women's access to senior leadership. The belief that men make better leaders than women is still common. Women in certain countries are not allowed to reach senior positions because it is forbidden for women in general to take charge. Women face outmoded cultural practices, religious prohibitions, social stratification, and ethnic prejudice. In some instances, women are excluded from certain industries or forbidden to work at night. Some women can be sidelined and excluded from leadership management positions based on perceptions of poor cultural fit. Hale et al. 2016 explained that often talented women are relegated to human resource management positions as a casting to more senior leadership positions in many organizations. Furthermore, the United States, the United Arab Emirates, and India are among the bottom 10 economies in the world in terms of women in leadership positions, and 24% of women hold top leadership positions globally. These disappointing percentages are leading countries to implement affirmative action to increase representation of women in top leadership. For example, Norway enacted gender quota law in 2003, where at least 40% of board members of all companies must be women. In 2010, women only made 77 cents to every dollar a man earned in the United States for the same job they held. Gender inequality continues to be a major challenge that most women face in the workplace. Moreover, The Paycheck Fairness Act was intended to expand upon the protections offered by the Equal Pay Act and Fair Labor Standards Act, which were blocked by Congress in both 2010 and 2012. Sheila Huda has over 30 years of leadership and governance experience, providing strategic direction, driving growth, and transforming Fortune 300 firms in the global financial services, professional and information services, and education and consumer industries. She is currently the president of Alpha Advisory Partners, an advisory firm providing strategy. This is what she had to say about barriers facing women leaders.
What do you think is the biggest challenge to women in leadership positions today?
It's hard because there are no role models. I named you four women, only 5% of women in the Fortune 500 are women CEOs. So there's no role model, there is no network. They are kind of learning as they go. It's easier when you have many people out there so you can learn, you can follow, you can go for guidance, you have mentors. So lack of role models is one aspect that's hurting women. The second thing I feel is to reach the pinnacle of your career and to be considered a strong leader, it's a continual hard learning process. Women unfortunately face the age demographic. By age 35, if you're not married, if by 40 you don't have a kid, you may never have a kid again. So many women at that stage make decisions to stay home or look after their kids or force themselves to find a husband to have a kid, manage the family. But at that time is also the most demanding time career-wise. And despite whatever they say in the press about pathways off the career and then come back, once you step out, it is close to impossible to come back because all your peers will be ahead of you. Your skills will be outdated. You lose credibility. So this is what is hurting women in the workplace. It's that demographic time frame where their careers peak, but their personal lives have to keep balance. And it's hard. It's very hard.
Hale et al. 2016 further conveyed additional challenges facing women leaders, such as inflexibility of career paths, where women are often torn between advancing in their careers and caring for their families and elders. There is also a workplace stereotype bias escalating among young mothers in many markets. Organizations need to recognize situational problems that vary across cultures to be solved by making and implementing culturally appropriate decisions. Eli et al. 2011 added the lack of role models for women as another challenge. Relative to their male counterparts, aspiring women leaders have less social support for learning to credibly claim a leader identity. Lastly, as women rise in the hierarchy, they become increasingly scarce and increasingly more visible and thus subject to more scrutiny. Eli et al. 2011 explained that under this microscope, women can become risk averse, overly focused on details, and often losing sight of their larger purpose as leaders. This is the case study number 1. Monroe et al. 2015 explained that the 2013 statistics of women leaders in the field of medicine reflected a gender gap. For instance, women comprised 16% of medical school deans, 15% of department chairs, and 24% of division directors. Monroe et al. Decided to follow up with a study of their own at the Johns Hopkins University School of Medicine. And this is what they found. Out of the 474 faculty members, 181 were women, which represented 38%. Among professors, 18% were full professor men and 4% were full professor women. The rest are associate professors. 88% of division directors were men, and 73% of fellowship program directors were men. Only at the assistant research positions level that the number was equal, 50% men and 50% women. Case study number 2. Shangace and Prosh 2014 conducted a qualitative research with female employees in a telecommunication company. In-depth interviews were held, and these are the results. Most of the perceptions of the female leader revolved around being goal-directed and a decision maker, with a note that their weaknesses are being subjective and unable to think outside the box. 60% of the respondents, who were females, preferred male leaders as long as they exercised no nepotism and had no inferiority complex. 40% of the respondents preferred female leaders as long as they are fair and not condescending. Most respondents believed males had a vast experience and females had much less experience. Grooming of female employees for leadership positions was reported to be almost inexistent. As per Sindel and Schamberger, 2016, while men are encouraged and praised for blending masculine and feminine traits, women are caught between a push and pull. They are told to be masculine, but not too much. They are told to stay true to their feminine qualities, but not too much. Women are simply expected to master a balancing act between gendered behaviors without being given the tools or development to do so. Facing all the challenges elaborated thus far, we realize the need to create a development environment where women do not feel excluded. According to STED 2014, moving from a gender mix strategy where all sets have at least one female towards an equal gender strategy may be more effective to avoid feelings of marginalization. With fewer women leaders than men leaders, this suggests finding methods that promote a stronger holding environment. A holding environment can enable women in leadership roles to confront and come to terms with gender bias. These methods suggested are the Feedback 360, networking, and negotiating skills. Feedback 360 is based on collecting, delivering, and processing feedback as a fixture for leadership development. According to Eli et al. 2011, Feedback 360 is particularly beneficial to women leaders because they typically receive less feedback than men. Feedback 360 is comprehensive and more detailed than what they ordinarily receive. Processing this feedback with peers and a coach would allow the identification of gender stereotypes and double binds. Interpreting the comments in this context helps women leaders make sense of them and better understand their larger purpose. Furthermore, sharing feedback with bosses and peers assists women leaders in countering gender bias and increasing their own effectiveness. Having the consistent and accessible support will definitely improve their leadership capability. Networking consists of helping women leaders build networking opportunities, expanding the depth and range of developmental relationships. It should follow an in-depth tactic, though, by giving women leaders a framework for exploring how gender may be operating in their networks, as well as the opportunities to identify areas and strategies for improvement. Additionally, networking relies on supporting women in finding potential sponsors or coaches beyond their bosses and helping them develop strategies for enhancing those relationships. Also, encouraging women to integrate networking into daily activities such as using projects, committees, and assignments strategically as opportunities to develop new relationships. Women negotiate every day on behalf of their groups or organizations to overcome disadvantages and unfair treatment. Through negotiation, women raise awareness on gendered issues and gendered work practices. For example, negotiating a flexible work arrangement reveals how an organization's practice makes it difficult for mothers to succeed. Women should also learn to enlarge what constitutes negotiation. For example, using negotiation in issues not seen as debatable before, making women more aware and more prepared for different organizational issues. Providing women with strategic negotiations tools and tactics of legitimizing their positions in face of resistance. Moreover, helping women adopt a specific framework by having them identify, prepare for, and practice important negotiations. Practice infuses women with confidence and helps them develop an empowering sense of agency. In order to acquire an idea about how women leaders would be receptive to such supportive programs like the Feedback 360, the networking and negotiations frameworks, I sent a questionnaire to only 12 female leaders from different settings, 6 of whom are school principals, 4 are school department heads, and 2 are senior store managers. The questions were: how do you think a 360 feedback program where detailed insight and comments from peers, bosses, subordinates, and customers is relayed to you on a regular basis can be beneficial to you? How do you feel a networking framework that goes beyond your position and bosses can help you improve your knowledge in understanding how gender operates in your network? How do you feel honing your negotiation skills will help you better discuss and negotiate gender structures and work practices? The results were as follows. 75% of respondents felt positively about adding a Feedback 360 component in their leadership development strategy, stressing on the need for a detailed framework of understanding the different steps. 67% responded positively about a networking opportunity beyond their bosses and own setting, stressing on how time consuming this may be. Lastly, 83% of the respondents were positive about learning in-depth negotiation skills that could help them address major issues on behalf of their subordinates and organization. The results show that although some women may be reluctant to adopt new strategies of networking, most need the education and support to overcome gendered issues at the workplace, and they are ready to collaborate in order to better represent and advocate for their employees. It is safe to say that in order for women to better take on their leadership roles, they must consider, acknowledge, and understand the role of gender in their network. It is important for women to discern between having feminine traits and acting like a successful leader. But they cannot do this on their own. They need the support and encouragement of their organization that should put in place advanced programs for women, assisting them and preparing them to counter all gendered issues and take on the leadership role successfully. Marlene, 2008, explained that this is not an option, but rather an integral component for women's success. Women are constantly faced by effectiveness versus likability problems, making them look nice but not as assertive as leaders should be, or too rough and not compassionate enough as females. Programs such as the Feedback 360 and the negotiating and networking programs can educate women about their gender role and how it can be effectively used and channeled to be a successful leader. The limitations of the study. The literature review relayed in this presentation focused on all women leaders without a differentiation by age or race. Furthermore, the survey conducted to test the suggested methods was only sent to women, and the scope of the study was rather small for such a big topic, only 12 respondents. More positive responses could possibly be generated if the survey had a larger scope. Future studies could entail researching the effect of age and race on women's leadership. What kind of challenges and barriers would pertain to those factors specifically, or maybe the multiplicity of them? Also, studies that measure the success of the Feedback 360, the networking and negotiating programs, could be immensely helpful, as well as including men in questionnaires and interviews in order to acquire a clearer and better image of the extent of the issue's improvement. Jimenez and Fuentes, 2016, deftly explained that gender is a very rich and complex demographic variable since its effects originate in managers' socio-cognitive bases. They found that a team composed of at least 3 women will be more heterogeneous and have more interaction, permitting high-quality decision-making and innovative solutions in an organization. Women in top management bring new perspectives, contribute values, creativity, flexibility, and a variety of capacities that are crucial to the success of any organization. It will only make sense to find and implement methods that empower women to give their fullest potential as leaders. Organizations that will truly excel in the future are the ones that discover how to tap people's commitment and capacity to learn at all levels in the organization and offer them the support and education they need in order to be effective in any leadership position they decide to take on. Maybe then leadership can become a style rather than a predictable gendered role. Before I conclude my presentation, I thank you for your time and I look forward to your comments and feedback. I hope you found my project interesting and informative. I leave you with the following video and some advice from women leaders, followed by my list of references. Thank you so much again.
What is the best advice you've ever received?
To be intense in outcomes, but be very chill with people. It's all about relationships in the end.
The best advice I ever got was from my mother, that fear is not an option.
I was 17 years old and my father said to me, if you speak the truth, I will stand with you and so will the world.
I have a friend who always told me to just not even bother getting out of bed unless you were willing to think big.
It's not how often will you fail, it's how quickly will you get up once you fail.
Let not anybody else be your certifying person. End of the day, you have to look into your eyes and say you're good.
The best thing for me was when I was growing up in Ireland, wedged between 4 brothers. That's my early interest in human rights and equality and all that. But my parents always said to me, you have as much right to be whatever you want to be as they do. And somehow that gave me an inner confidence